Hello and welcome to the Fertility Foundations podcast, where we go into detail about how to prepare the foundations for a healthy pregnancy. We dive deep into the underlying root causes for fertility issues and natural solutions. I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not broken. I hope that by sharing these episodes, this will help you move from feeling overwhelmed and lost to feeling hopeful and empowered to take charge of your own path to parenthood, because there are actually lots of things that you can do to help rewrite your own story. I'm Sandra Greenbank, nutritional therapist, functional medicine practitioner, coach and educator, specializing in fertility, pregnancy and postpartum health. I'm also the founder of the Fertility Nutrition Center, where you can find fully trained experts in nutrition, lifestyle and functional approaches to a healthy fertility and pregnancy. You can find out more information over at www.fertilitynutritioncenter.org and also book a free strategy call with one of our experts. Today I'm speaking to Julia Young about trying to conceive with PCOS. Julia offers personalized nutrition and lifestyle support and believes in the importance of getting to the root cause of your fertility issues. Having gone through fertility struggles herself, she's passionate about supporting couples and women with their fertility and hormonal issues. Julia was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and suffered from absent periods for 7 years, which meant that her and her husband were unable to conceive naturally. After several rounds of fertility treatment and a miscarriage, they were finally blessed with 2 boys, one via IUI and one via IVF. However, it was only after discovering that nutrition, lifestyle and supplements could impact health that Julia's periods returned. This inspired her to train as a registered nutritional therapist and to go on to help others struggling to conceive. This podcast is sponsored by In Vivo Healthcare, a human microbiome company. They specialize in accurate testing of different microbiomes, such as the gut, vagina, oral, and urinary tract, as well as a range of specially curated supplements focused on the microbiomes. They support healthcare providers and their clients navigate the complex world of the human microbiomes and is one of the most used labs and supplements by our fertility specialists. Visit the In Vivo website for more information at www.invivohealthcare.com. Now let's get into today's interview with Julia. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Fertility Foundations podcast.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Julia, we're talking about PCOS today. And first of all, if someone suspects that they've got PCOS, what symptoms should they look out for?
Okay, so with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, the symptoms to look out for really are weight gain or difficulty losing weight or maintaining weight. Often women suffer with excess hair growth, particularly sort of around the face and chin area. Male pattern baldness can be an issue as well. There can also be skin issues, so acne can develop. And, women can suffer from infrequent or even absent periods. So they may find that their cycle is a lot longer or they may not be having periods at all. There's also increased risk of diabetes as well to look out for. So there's a real collection of symptoms. It's not a disease. It's a syndrome. And some women can have some of these symptoms, all of them, or even very few symptoms at all, really, with PCOS.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Because there's so many different things that can apply to you, and not everyone who actually has PCOS is overweight or struggles to lose weight. So there's that section of people who are lean, we call it lean PCOS as well. But it's the absence of ovulation or the issues with ovulation that it comes with that actually then can have an impact on fertility. Is that right?
That's right, yes. I mean, it could be that it's certainly not impossible to get pregnant if you have PCOS. So that's the first thing to remember, not to despair. But it can take women longer to get pregnant. With PCOS, you tend to have elevated luteinizing hormone, the LH, and more reduced follicle stimulating hormone, coupled with elevated androgen hormones, which are the kind of male, the hormones with male traits, so like, for example, testosterone, and higher insulin levels as well. So the development of your follicles, because the follicular development can be limited, which means that potentially egg development can't occur or it's delayed. So this can result in irregular ovulation. So obviously, if you're having regular periods, perhaps your cycle is longer, then there's just going to be less opportunity to get pregnant. And also it can be more difficult to pinpoint when you're actually ovulating. So it can just make more difficult when you're trying to conceive naturally. Or there could be the issue of not ovulating at all. So if if you don't have periods, you're not ovulating, then obviously you're not going to be getting pregnant naturally. Also with PCOS, egg quality can be affected. And this is due to sort of overexposure of these androgen hormones. And again, with higher insulin as well, can affect the quality of the eggs. And then, as we said before, weight gain can be a symptom. And we know that if we're overweight, fertility can be affected. Again, it can affect egg quality. It can increase the risk of pregnancy complications and things like that. So it can be harder and take longer to conceive. But the good news and that, the positive to come out of this is that diet and lifestyle can have a really positive effect in helping to manage the condition. So there's a lot that can be done from a diet and lifestyle perspective, definitely.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. But just in terms of diagnosing, I know that this can be really, really difficult. And if someone suspects that they have PCOS and this is the root cause of their fertility issues, what should they do?
So if someone's got some of these symptoms and it's something they suspect, the first instance I say go to your doctor, your general practitioner, and they can do some basic tests to test your hormone levels. And they can look at things like your fasting insulin as well, which is really important, and cholesterol levels, because it is a metabolic condition. So it's important to get some general tests done. But really, to get an official diagnosis, there's a criteria called the Rotterdam criteria. And as part of that criteria, you have to have 2 out of 3 certain criteria have to be diagnosed. So the first one is where you'd have an ultrasound and they'd find multiple cysts on the ultrasound. And then coupled with that, either having irregular periods or no periods at all. And then the third one is having a higher level of these androgen hormones. So, for example, testosterone. So if you have 2 out of 3 of those criteria, then you could be diagnosed with having polycystic ovarian syndrome. And then from there, sometimes the first, as I say, obviously working on diet and lifestyle is really important, but from a kind of doctor perspective, and you're trying to conceive, you may be put on a medication such as Clomid or letrozole, which helps to stimulate the release of eggs from the ovaries. That can be very effective with couples trying that for a number of cycles and trying naturally, but using this medication, and it can help couples to conceive. So it's certainly worth looking at all of the options first before maybe jumping into something like fertility treatment, and looking at obviously working on what you can before sort of doing anything further in that instance, definitely.
Yeah, so that's the thing, isn't it? So really, unless the stimulation medication doesn't work, generally the next step is IVF that you will be offered, and then you will go on the waiting list for your IVF clinic. But a lot of the time, if there's a weight issue, your GP will say to you, go away, lose some weight, because otherwise you won't qualify for the IVF, potentially if your BMI is over 30, for example. And then you're kind of left with this, I've been trying to lose weight all my life. And then you might be tempted to go on a crash diet or like over-exercising. Do you think that's sort of is that what you see as well? Because that's what I definitely have noticed.
Absolutely. It can be really frustrating because, I've had clients come to me and they've been told by their doctor or almost by a panel of consultants, oh, you just have to go away and lose weight. And it can be very disheartening because, as you say, they've been trying it all before. It's not like they haven't been doing everything they can. And, then they might go on a very calorie controlled, restricted diet to try and lose weight that way. And sometimes these can be effective, people can lose weight that way, but quite often it's rapid weight loss, and we need to be careful about rapid weight loss because we store toxins in our fat tissue. So if we're losing weight very quickly, then we release those toxins into the body and they can affect egg quality. So really the way that we want to do it is very much a slower pace, a steady pace. It needs to be sustainable. So, having someone that can, support you, give you the accountability that you need, but also giving you the guidance of what to eat. And it's not just a case of taking everything away and as they not eating anything. It's often adding foods into the diet that you might not be having that can actually make a really positive impact. And the weight will naturally then come off. If you're eating a very nutritious diet and getting in the right foods for you, then the weight will naturally come off. And similarly with the exercising piece, exercise is very important for PCOS, but it can be a stressor on the body. So it's about doing the right type of exercise for you. So over exercising can release cortisol levels and produce stress on the body and hinder weight loss. So really it's about movement. Strength training can be very effective, but not sort of, if you're someone that's going out every day doing runs and very intense cardio, then you might need to look at what you're doing and slow things down a bit, and doing the right more restorative exercise that's going to be more effective for you, and not such hardcore exercise at the moment. So getting some support in that area and someone that can really hold your hand and guide you into what you should be doing can be really helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, actually. The starvation and over-exercising, those two things sends a message to your brain that you're under stress and food is scarce. And actually, right now is not a good time to have a baby. And actually, we really want to always focus on sending the right message to the brain to say it's safe, everything is fine. The time is right to bring a baby in, because although that might sound a little bit woo or airy-fairy, it's not. Sometimes your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing under any given circumstance. And we are, evolution is incredible, really, in how it sort of can hinder, stress we know will eventually hinder ovulation because it, increases certain hormones that will then stop ovulation, for example. And so all of this kind of starvation diets or over-exercising, it's all just changing your hormones and your gut microbiome in a really potentially detrimental way. So it's all about doing it right, I suppose, getting it right, making sure that you're always nourished and always looking after yourself, whilst also, reaching your goals. It might be a little bit slower potentially, but much more fertility friendly, I suppose.
Yeah, I completely agree. And also, we want people to be changing the way they're eating and then doing that for life. Skills that they can learn, that they can then, use themselves, pass on to their family, and eat like that long term. It's not something we want them to do for 3 months and then go back to the way they were eating. That's not how it's going to be sustainable. That's not what's going to keep the weight off. It's making lifelong changes, and that can take that a little bit longer, but it can be really effective. And they say the temptation, I mean, at the moment, still the keto diet, for example, is really popular. And that involves really restricting your carbohydrate intake. And again, women need carbohydrates to ovulate. So if you're going to take all the carbohydrates out, that could impact ovulation. Again, we need carbohydrates to support our gut microbiome, as you mentioned. So taking out or dropping the carbohydrates isn't necessarily the answer. We might need to reduce them a little bit, or look at when we're eating our carbohydrates. That can be effective, and sort of time of day. But actually going completely keto for fertility or for PCOS really isn't the answer. So it is about making those slow and sustainable changes that are going to have the most positive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we always have to look after the gut microbiome, because they look after us, they make our hormones, and, they make nutrients as well. And I think also what I'm finding is that a lot of people who have a diagnosis of PCOS, actually, they've just had a blood test, or they've just had a scan, but they haven't had all of the tests that you mentioned, or obviously, the two, I suppose, the scan and the blood test. And sometimes it is misdiagnosed, and there could be another reason for the lack of periods. That is not,
absolutely,
because you can have polycystic ovaries without having the actual syndrome. And the other thing I find is that the minute you've got a diagnosis, your partner, if you have a male partner, is off the hook. And then there is a huge part that's potentially missed out of the puzzle. There's a huge piece of the puzzle, because even though one person might have a diagnosis, it doesn't mean that the other person doesn't also have a small or potentially a major part to play. And I think it's really important to still involve the male partner and do all of the tests for them as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've worked with people who've come to me because they have PCOS. And luckily, I have worked with both the partners, and that is my preference. I always stress if I can work with a couple rather than just one of the partners, that I get the best results. But we've then looked at, there's been nothing done into the male side of things. And yes, there's work to be done on her side, but we found equally there's stuff to be done on his side. So it can sometimes be just one person where there's an issue, but more often than not, there's something on both sides, to be honest. Yeah. And even if, there's always ways to optimize people's fertility anyway on both sides. So yeah, it's really important.
Absolutely. And I think that if you can get the ovulation back, even though the cycles are still potentially longer, and then you're improving the other side of the other side of it as well at the same time, then, it might be that that's enough for you to then go on to conceive naturally. And actually, I think the other thing that is really important to focus on if we're thinking about our long-term health, like you mentioned, the positive impact that will have on your life as a couple, as well as your children, is that, you're learning all these things for life. And sort of once you know something, you're sort of not going to unlearn it. And epigenetically, I think if I had my time again and I was having children again, I'd want to sort of biohack my children's future health and sort of really prepare and really try and avoid certain things that could have an impact on their genetics and how their genetics are expressed in the womb and actually throughout their entire life, such as, stress reduction or improving the microbiome and, all of these things that we do anyway, and really sort of focusing on certain nutrients that are really supportive for methylation. And, there's loads and loads of research now that looks at this. So I just, I despair when I hear doctors say, just do IVF. You don't have to do all this natural stuff, just do IVF. And it's like, IVF might work, but then you're still going to have all of the underlying issues, and nobody's improving their biology and their expression of their genetics, or, you're just sort of staying, potentially not feeling particularly well either.
Yeah, you want to, I always say the goal shouldn't be just about getting that positive pregnancy test. You want, the end result should be a healthy baby, and you want to have a healthy pregnancy leading up to that as well. So it isn't about just stepping into IVF, and doing it all there. You need to do the preparation work, and you want to have that enjoyable, healthy pregnancy, the healthy birth, and then a healthy child in the end. You don't have to be dealing with issues when sometimes there are issues, but you don't want to increase the risk of things happening with the child once it's born. So you want to there's such an opportunity here to do all that work beforehand and really ensure that your baby is healthy, which is what you want at the end of the day. Absolutely.
Yeah, and a healthy mum as well. And I think with PCOS particularly, it does put your risk, for example, of gestational diabetes and other things. So if we can pull this back before pregnancy, then you've got more of a buffer there as you go through pregnancy. And, we do become naturally quite poor at handling carbohydrates in pregnancy. But, if you're going in with sort of higher base level, then, that's just potentially not going to be as healthy a pregnancy as it could be. So let's talk a bit more about what nutritional therapy can do to help support women with PCOS who are trying to conceive then, food-wise.
Yeah, so firstly, it's important, I think, to say that a nutritional therapist won't just focus on the diagnosis. So if you're coming to a nutritional therapist and saying, I've got PCOS and I want to conceive, we have very much a whole body approach. We are identifying and supporting imbalances in the body. So what we do is very much address the root cause. So, regardless of the diagnosis, we want to know what's causing the PCOS. So we kind of touched on this a bit before, but a large majority of the cases it is associated with insulin resistance, but then it can also be associated with inflammation in the body, high levels of chronic inflammation in the body. There is such thing as post-pill PCOS. So you may have had normal periods, started taking the contraceptive pill, and then come off it and notice that maybe your periods hadn't returned. Being on the pill, it kind of masks what our hormones are doing, and PCOS may have developed as a result of that.
Often, if you are a teenager, you have problems, and as you start your periods, the solution is the pill, but the pill is never the solution to irregular periods, because the pill bleed is not a real bleed, it's a fake bleed, and you're just potentially putting off your issues for 10, 15 years or however long you're going to stay on that pill. And also the pill itself depletes really important nutrients, B vitamins, and it damages the gut microbiome. So I think if anybody really who's been on the pill for a long time has some work to do, really, to sort of correct issues that might have been caused by it. Yeah, sorry, interrupting you there, but
no. It's when you're on the pill, you just don't know what's going on with your hormones, do you? You don't. It's masking everything. So if you are currently taking the pill and thinking that you might want to conceive in a few years' time, maybe start thinking about maybe using alternative methods of contraception, etc., just to try and get your body back into a natural state. And your PCOS could be driven by stress as well, what we call adrenal PCOS. So there are a number of types of PCOS, and that's important to identify which is your type. And as you mentioned, there is this sort of lean type PCOS where you don't have the insulin resistance, or you may have the insulin resistance, but you don't potentially have the weight issue as well. So just because you're not struggling with your weight doesn't mean that the PCOS isn't there. So I think that's important, that we really identify the root cause. As I said, we can support you with weight loss if that's something you need to focus on. Giving you the accountability. Sometimes it's having someone there that's going to sort of check up on you and support you along the way and hold your hand can be really important. Supporting you with lifestyle factors, again, really important. They can be quite hard to do on your own. So again, someone there that can help you with all the different lifestyle factors that are important to support. And with nutritional therapists also have access to lots of testing as well, which can be really useful. Yeah. So beyond your diagnosis of the PCOS, we can look at other conditions that might need to be ruled out. So, for example, there's a strong association between PCOS and thyroid health. So it's really important that we do a full comprehensive panel looking at the thyroid function, not just looking at your thyroid stimulating hormone, which is often what is tested, but looking at there are actual five or even 6 markers that we need to test of the thyroid to check that it's working optimally. So just because your thyroid stimulating hormone might be looking okay, it doesn't mean that your actual active and inactive thyroid hormones are okay. It doesn't mean that you haven't got thyroid antibodies there as well. So all of that needs to be ruled out and checked that that's working properly. Looking at the gut, because we know there's a strong association again with PCOS and the gut, and making sure that's functioning properly and that there are not any hidden infections that could be driving anything there. Looking at vitamin D status is really important. And vitamin D is a really important one for PCOS, for our immune status as well.
And for fertility,
Yeah, absolutely. And research shows that vitamin D improves insulin resistance and ovulation rates. So it's important that we have a good level. And so many of my clients have inadequate vitamin D levels, and you just don't know unless you test.
I think about 85% of people with PCOS have vitamin D deficiency, and the GPs don't test for this anymore generally because they're just told to assume that everybody's low in vitamin D, but I just don't think that's good enough. We need to know exactly how low so that we then know exactly how much we need to give. And, if you're very, very low, if you're actually very deficient, then, you might need a high dose prescription, which you can't buy over the counter. So, and it's such a cheap test that, it's just has to be done.
Yeah, we should be doing it a few times a year really to know what our levels are. And as I say, the GP would just recommend probably quite a low dose, which may well not be enough for you. But on the flip side, there is such thing as vitamin D toxicity. So we need to check that we're not taking too much as well. But the vitamin D is stored in our fat tissue. So if we are someone that's struggling with our weight and are overweight, and we have a higher body percentage of fat, it may mean that we're not able to utilize vitamin D more easily, as it tends to be bound up to fat tissue. So we may have this higher need for vitamin D. So that's a really important one to check. So there's lots of testing that we can do, just to check there's nothing else going on with the body, and to make sure that everything's, working well for fertility as well. We can look at how our hormones are being broken down, metabolized through a Dutch test, a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. That could be useful as well for women with PCOS, and looking at cortisol levels as well in the body. So there's with the nutritional therapist, there's certainly lots of areas that we look at and make sure that we haven't missed anything out.
One of the tests that's quite useful is the Dutch test. And I've actually got I've got a podcast recording with Dr. Carrie Jones called Hormone Testing for Fertility with Dr. Carrie Jones. And that's a really good kind of run through of just how to test your hormones. And, we talked a lot about the Dutch as part of that. And I think, it's really important to not just rely on the very basic tests that's available through the kind of conventional medical setting, I suppose, and actually use some of these more high-tech and in-depth tests that, really look at where we can turn a couple of dials to kind of then help your own sort of biochemistry and make that weight loss a bit more effortless, make that, make everything just a bit easier for your body to do what it's meant to be doing, as opposed to kind of just pushing against all of the time. Yeah. And I think stool testing, again, is something that we do all the time. And it might sound a bit strange to say, I've got hormone deficiency, and then we sort of ask you to poo in a box and put it in the post. But hormone health always begins in the gut, right?
Yeah.
You just can't have healthy, balanced hormones without a really well-functioning gut. And if you know that you're constipated, for example, that is absolutely the number one thing to address, because constipation does not help hormonal health, because our hormones are cleared out through the digestive system. And if there's a sort of blockage there, or if it's not, if it's just not functioning properly, then most likely you're going to have a knock-on effect hormonally, and all hormones kind of work in unison like an orchestra. So if one's out, others are likely to be out, like you've said about the thyroid, for example. But also there's a lot of nutrients that we can help to really push a healthy testosterone metabolism as well, which can be an issue specifically in PCOS situations, and also really help to balance those blood sugars. So we want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so really, so balancing blood sugar is really important, and that's all about focusing on protein and fat, really. And although I said not to cut out carbohydrates, but maybe slightly lower levels of carbohydrates, but less of the refined carbohydrates. So really, with PCOS and fertility in general, sugar, unfortunately, is the enemy. And so you want to be cutting down on sugary foods that you might be eating. Yes, those from cakes, biscuits, etc., but also the refined carbohydrates, which are the kind of fluffy white carbohydrates that you might get from white bread, white rice, white pasta, things like that. So we want to focus on the whole grains, which are more your brown rices, your quinoa, sweet potato, etc., which are going to be packed with fiber, which are going to be broken down a lot more slowly in the blood. And we're not going to get these spikes of energy that's going to disrupt our blood glucose levels. So focusing on more the whole grains than the refined carbohydrates. And then making sure we're getting lots of antioxidants into the diet as well. And we do that through really eating lots of different coloured fruit and vegetables. So every different colour of fruit and vegetables have different, what we call polyphenols or plant chemicals, that is going to have a really positive impact on egg health and fertility in general. So making sure we're getting lots of variety in the diet, plenty of protein, as I said, and healthy fats as well. So we shouldn't be afraid of fat. But if we need to lose weight, that's a myth that we should be cutting down on the amount of fat we're eating. Yes, the processed foods and the which will contain the unhealthy fats we don't want. But the things like that we get from oily fish, nuts and seeds are really important to include those in the diet.
And olive oil as well.
Yeah, plenty of olive oil.
Just that really kind of healthy. And, it's really important, actually, because all our cell membranes are made up of the fats that we have in our diet. And the cell membranes need to function optimally so that they then can communicate with the outside of the cell and with the hormones. And if the cells aren't working properly, then, nothing's going to work properly. And I think that it's so important to not fear the fats, but actually it's the kind of hydrogenated fats, the shelf-stable fats, potentially cutting down a bit on saturated fats as well from the likes of red meat and processed foods generally. Just anything processed is going to be less helpful, and anything that you find in the fruit and vegetable section or, poultry, eggs, like you said, the brown rice, those are all, they're natural foods, and they are not the enemy. And actually insulin is the fat storing hormone, right? So, and insulin spikes when you eat too much of the wrong types of carbohydrates. So what we want to do is keep the insulin low and stable, and then you're not getting that message to your cells that they need to store the excess energy away as fat. And I think this is kind of maybe a bit of a leap to sort of imagine that, it's not the fat that actually gets stored as fat necessarily. It's when you eat it with too many carbohydrates. And actually there's like lifestyle things we can do as well to really help keep that insulin low, like, for example, sleep.
Yeah, such a big one. I mean, sleep contributes to hormone imbalance. And lack of sleep decreases your cell sensitivity to insulin. So it causes increased blood insulin levels, which can lead to increased testosterone as well. So sleep can be a really hard one, because we've got so many distractions nowadays, Netflix, etc. Just busy lifestyles that's keeping us, phones and all that sort of thing that's keeping us stay awake. And it's the one thing that we think we can sort of cut out on. But actually for PCOS and for health in general and fertility in general, sleep is one of the number one things that we should do from a lifestyle perspective. We should be getting good sleep, and whether that's making sure that the devices are off a couple of hours before bed ideally, and slowly bringing your bedtime forward sort of 10 minutes a night till you get to an earlier bedtime can be really effective. It's those hours before midnight where we get the best quality sleep. So really looking at your sleep hygiene, and it's a really difficult one to do actually, because we can have all the best intentions and then it kind of goes on the wayside, but it can make a huge impact to us.
Yeah, and that daily rhythm is so important, the circadian rhythm, and it ties in with the moon cycles and your own cycles, and all of these kind of rhythms have been shown to, if you can keep in that with, especially if you've got PCOS, actually that does help regulate your cycles as well. So getting up, exposing yourself to the sun, trying to get up at the same time every day, not getting up too late in the weekend, for example, getting to bed, and keeping it consistent, because that's sending the right signals to the brain again.
It's not about banking sleep, is it, the weekends or anything like that? No. It's having that consistent routine. And and sleep deprivation, we probably all know this, and it makes us crave those sugary carb foods.
Yeah,
if you one night's bad sleep and the next day you're reaching for something that you maybe wouldn't normally eat, and that can have a real impact. It increases those hunger hormones. So just being a bit more disciplined with that. I like the idea of waking up and say exposing to sunlight, but also just wake up and drawing the curtains, looking outside for a few minutes to get a bit of daylight into your eyes is a good starting point. Sort of not living in the dark. Live in the dark in the evenings, but during the day getting as much daylight as you can, getting outside if you can.
And also using blue light blocking glasses at night, for example. If you can't avoid screens, you can use these really quite cheap and easy to get blue light blocking glasses that can really help as well, because it's all about the light that's hitting the back of your retina. And if it's a certain color light, it's going to affect your brain and how it perceives what time of day it is or what's going on. So, it's all just about kind of, again, it's just sending the right signals, isn't it? And there's some other simple hacks you can do as well. Like, for example, go for a brisk walk around the block after a meal to really help sort of bring that sugar into the cells, bring the insulin levels down.
Also, I quite like the idea of when you're eating your meals, it's not always possible, but sort of eating, if you can, your foods in a certain order. So going for kind of the vegetables first.
Yeah.
And then the protein. Yeah. Having like a start with a salad and then your kind of protein and fat and leaving the carbohydrates to the end. And actually, sometimes you might not need as many of the carbohydrates because you might be quite full up from the protein and fat in your meal as well. But if you can sort of do it that order, that can have a really positive impact as well on your blood glucose levels.
Yeah. And for some people, backloading the carbs, so having your carbs in the evenings can be useful. And this tends to be something we need to play around with to see what works for you, because it's all about personalized, a personalized approach, really. But yeah, and also apple cider vinegar, although I'm not a fan drinking apple cider vinegar necessarily sort of constantly, but, it can be something that can be really useful to help as well.
Yeah. I actually quite like it with sparkling water combined. It actually tastes a bit like a kombucha drink, but it's quite nice. Makes it slightly easier to take, not as strong as having a sort of shot of it. But yeah, that can be effective as well, definitely.
I was sent actually, Willie's, the brand that do vinegar. They sent me some kombucha drinks with vinegar in them, and actually they are really delicious. And there's no added sugar, there's no sweetness. They're sort of like a sparkling drink, and they're really nice. Although you sort of probably don't want to be buying sort of special drinks for, regular use. But yeah, there's so many things that you can do, isn't there? And, we're not going to be able to cover them all in one podcast episode. But is there anything that you should be specifically avoiding?
Yeah, so aside from the kind of the sugar and the refined carbohydrates, we kind of talked about this already, but the low-fat dairy products, they can be quite insulin stimulating. So to avoid low-fat foods in general, and if you're having dairy, going for the full fat.
And that's because they contain starch, right? They put starch in to make up for the lack of fat, and actually all of that starch that's what we want to be avoiding, right? And the other thing is, and I think recently there's been loads of news reports about this, but sweeteners, they are so, go on.
No, I was just going to say that, firstly, the body still sees them as sugar. So it's not okay. It's no secret with sweeteners. They're not a magic bullet. Your body will still see them as sugar in the body. We know research shows that they impact the gut bacteria. We need, as we said before, we need to be supporting the gut microbiome. So you don't want anything that's going to kind of destroy the gut microbiome. And now in the news, there's been lots of sweeteners, news about sweeteners and links with cancer and things like that. So as a general health thing, we should be avoiding them anyway. Yeah. Really, the best policy is to retrain your palate to enjoy less sweet foods. And then you will get your sweet cravings will be reduced. This can be a little bit uncomfortable for a few days, but if you can start doing that, that's the best policy rather than trying to replace it with something else.
Do you have some tips for anyone who can do, what to do if you're craving sweets? Because I think this can be something that's really difficult when you have PCOS. I don't know if if it sort of comes with a sweet tooth almost. But what can somebody do who just loves to have, something sweet of an evening, like chocolate or sweets, or they just feel like they need something? Do you have like a strategy that you tend to try?
So I like, say if you were having some, full fat yogurt or something, I like adding cinnamon to dishes. That can really help because it has got a kind of naturally sweeter taste, but it's not sweeteners or anything like that. So that can help with sort of regulating blood glucose levels. If you're someone that likes reaching for the dark chocolate, for chocolates or in general sweets, try and aim to go a bit darker with your chocolate. So the higher the cocoa percentage of the chocolate, the lower the sugar content. So a sort of a milk chocolate versus a really high 70, 80 or 90% cocoa chocolate, you'll see a lot less sugar in there. It's a little bit of a bitter taste. Again, it takes getting used to. Sometimes you have to work your way up slowly in the percentages, but you can quite easily get used to that taste. And again, you're fine because it's quite a strong taste. You don't need as much as you might of a kind of a dairy milk type bar of chocolate. So having that, again, if you can combine it with some nuts as a snack, that will slow down the blood glucose release. We don't want too much. Fruit is berries are very healthy and have lots of antioxidants in them. So fruit, there is a place for fruit, but going for the lower, and that will give you obviously that's a sweet taste, but going for the lower sugar fruits is important. So things like your berries, kiwis, things like that, and not having too much, 1 or 2 portions a day, I'd say maximum really with fruit. So just, and just generally, what a great way to kind of reduce cravings is to start your day with your breakfast, to go for a breakfast that isn't sweet. So we're kind of all being exposed to or grown up of breakfast should be a cereal, something that's sweet, and that, a bowl of cornflakes with sugar or something like that. That's how we all grew up, kind of thing. But why should breakfast be this sweet thing that we eat first thing in the morning? Actually, breakfast can be a savoury option. It could be leftovers from the night before if you want something really quick. Eggs is a really great way of getting your protein and fat at breakfast time.
And vitamin D.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can do, and add in some vegetables as well if you can. And if you can do that, you'll find that you'll stay full up for a long time. Your blood glucose will be nice and steady. You won't be craving food earlier on, and it should set you up for the rest of the day and the choices that you make later on in the day. And if you can go through the day not snacking, again, that can be beneficial. Every time we're eating, we're releasing that insulin. So if we can stick to more 3, satisfying meals a day, that will be much better on our blood glucose levels, our insulin release, our gut health as well. Every time we eat something, our gut has to digest the food, and it can't do its resting and repairing in between. So actually having slightly longer gaps between meals and sticking to those 3 meals a day and lots of constant grazing. It's the constant grazing really that leads to the weight gain. So if we can minimize the snacking, that could be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think that wearing a continuous blood sugar monitor, which is actually designed for diabetics, but I think this is such a fantastic way to really learn how your body responds to different foods and how to really keep that blood sugar low throughout the day. Because, and there's lots of different brands on the market. You can just Google it, continuous blood sugar monitor, and it's just something that you wear generally for 2 weeks, and then you have an app that kind of it shows up on your app. And I learned that I cannot touch crisps at all, even if it's sort of, normally we would say, oh, have it with hummus or have it with a dip or have it with something, it just doesn't work for me. I absolutely cannot touch it. And also white rice is just like the devil for me. Regardless of whether I just have a tablespoon with, some chicken or whatever, how we normally would sort of tell people to have it. But it just, some foods for some people are just not going to work for them. And then, it's helpful then, because then you know that you need to choose something else, and you learn a lot in 2 weeks.
Yeah. I've done it as well myself, and I can't remember what all the results were now, but things like porridge, again, for some people, porridge is seen as a very healthy breakfast option. Yeah. And for some people it is, and it doesn't impact their blood glucose at all. For other people, it can be a huge spike. But then it might be, you can add nut butters and things like that, and maybe that will slow down the blood glucose response. But even that for some people is too much. Yeah. So that is a really good way of just learning what your body needs and how it reacts to foods is really a good way.
But just generally, I think if you're starting off with a really good protein and fat sort of heavy breakfast, or not heavy breakfast, but with slightly less carbs, then you don't start off your day on that blood sugar roller coaster, because it's when you're crashing that you're reaching for the things that aren't so helpful, because your body's sending signals, your brain's sending signals to your body going, we need to bring these blood sugar levels up because, we're going low, we're going down. And so again, it's just kind of re-educating yourself and your brain and your body to want the right foods, I suppose. And, a continental breakfast, or even if you have time in the morning, a cooked breakfast, there's nothing wrong with the full English, or, part of full English, I suppose. You just have to make sure that it's the good quality and not kind of deep fried or whatever. But, a good quality sausage is not to be kind of sniffed at, I think.
Yeah, excellent, brilliant. And people that don't have time for breakfast, as I said, can you make extra portions of dinner from the previous night and just warm a portion up and have that in the morning? That's, a really quick way of getting something that's, again, going to be not sweet, well balanced, and you may even sneak some vegetables in there as well at the same time. So there's lots of ways you can do it, and on a time budget as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Should we talk about supplements briefly? Because I'm sure that everyone who's listening wants to know what supplements they can take, although we're a food first approach always.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to say that you can't, and you've probably heard this before, but you can't out supplement a bad diet. If you're not getting the right foods and nutrition in first, there's no point in really investing in the supplements. But having said that, our soils are depleted, our bodies can be depleted, so we may need that boost, those extra nutrients, particularly when trying to conceive, and particularly with PCOS. But really, in terms of what are the best supplements for PCOS, it really depends. What works for one person may not work for another. We're all different. So in that area, I always say, work with someone that's qualified, that knows what they're talking about, because it's really important to get, a personalized approach. And there's such a variation between maybe going into your local supermarket and buying a brand of something and getting sort of practitioner grade quality supplements that are recommended to you. There's, there may be, you may find that they're slightly more expensive, the practitioner ones, but then actually you'll get a lot more of the nutrients, and you won't have all the fillers and extra stuff put in that we don't want to be taking. But having said that, there are certain nutrients that can be useful to supplement. So firstly, inositol, or myo-inositol, which is a naturally occurring compound in the body. We get small amounts in things like grains, in fruits and legumes, and it can really help to improve insulin resistance and testosterone levels, reduce the testosterone levels. So that can be really effective with women with PCOS. B vitamins, really important, especially B12 and folate. We know folate's really important for fertility anyway, and reducing uterine tube defects. But it's important, the B vitamins are important for allowing the insulin receptors to work properly, really important for hormone function and energy production. So again, we get those from eating meat, seafood, dairy and eggs, but again, we may well need to supplement. Vitamin D we talked about, so that's an important one, but test levels first before putting that in. Omega-3 fats can be really helpful. So your omega-3 fish oils, really important for reducing inflammation in the body. So again, which, as I said, PCOS is a metabolic condition, so reducing that inflammation can be really important, and also helps with things like equality and implantation success as well in terms of fertility. And another one I do recommend a lot is magnesium as well. It's a really essential mineral. It helps, hundreds of enzymes in the body to work properly. And again, it helps our insulin receptors to work properly. Also really important for relaxation. So if we're stressed, the right form of magnesium can be really, really helpful. And similarly, it can be really helpful for sleep as well. If sleep is an issue, taking the right form of magnesium in the evening. And also for making sure we're eating those leafy greens and nuts and seeds, we'll get some magnesium as well. But it's important, they should be personalized to you. It's not a case of, my friend took this and got pregnant, therefore should I take it? That's not necessarily the case. Looking at what's important for you, and remembering that supplements are really powerful. So it's not a case of the more you take, the better. Our liver has to process everything that we take. So sometimes, people are coming to me and they've got shopping lists of supplements that they're taking, and actually we're stripping down and thinking, you don't actually need all of these. It's costing you a lot of money, and it's putting your body through a huge burden to process all of them. So it's really important that we, looking at what you exactly need, maybe do some tests to look at nutrient levels, and then putting a personalized plan in place just for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message, to get it personalized, because also they all interact with each other, as well as with any drugs that you might be prescribed. And, you can cause a lot of damage if you take the wrong things. And also it's about the quality, isn't it? And the making sure that so a lot of the cheaper supplements, unfortunately, come with all these sort of fillers that are just detrimental, even sugars or types of forms of sugar or forms of starch, which is just not going to be helpful when you're trying to avoid sugar and starch.
It's very confusing as well, because lots of people, they're doing their own research now. They're reading certain books and it's telling you that this is useful, etc. And then it's very tempting just to buy it all. And that's not the solution. As I said, it's going to cost you a fortune, and it may be doing you more harm than good. So really get advice on that one.
Absolutely. So just as a last sort of point for anyone listening then, if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the things we've talked about today, do you have some top tips that people can make a start with at home, and little things that they can sort of feel like they're making it's going to make a difference to them? Some simple tips.
My biggest piece of advice would be to start slow and look at if there's things from this podcast that you feel useful and you could try, make one or two changes, one or two at a time. And once they're embedded, once they become a habit, then build on them. Don't try and do everything. It's what will happen if you try and do everything, that you're more likely to fail. It just becomes too difficult. So the best thing is to assess where you'll get the most benefit from. So if you feel that, the sugar and the refined carbs is an issue, work on that. Look at trying to reduce those in your diet and adding in additional foods in that sense. But if for you sleep's an issue, then work on that. Or maybe it's stress, then you need to look at your stress management. And remember that these are life changes, so they need to be sustainable. So doing everything at once just doesn't work. And if you need that support, get it. But just pick out one or two things and really try and nail those. And don't put too much pressure on yourself. But yeah, that can be really effective way of doing it.
And also, I think bring in your partner and make sure that they're supporting you. If you're trying to cut out sweets, or whatever it might be, or sleep more, can you make it something that you do together? Rather than one person buying all the stuff that you're trying to avoid, which just makes it impossible.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing is if you're trying to get rid of the sweets, and the easiest way is not to have them in the house. So yeah, you're right. If someone's bringing them in every day, it's just going to be set up to fail, really. So and similarly in the workplace, I mean, lots of people say to me, "Oh, there's always cakes and biscuits where I sit at my desk. Can they be moved? Can we put fruit there instead, or something else instead? Can you bring in your own snacks? Do they have to be sat at your end of the desk? Little strategies like that can make an absolutely huge difference."
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much, Julia. It's been a really nice chat, and we've actually recorded another podcast episode a while ago. Well, actually, a really long time ago. It was pre-COVID,
ages ago.
But if anyone wants to hear more from Julia, the episode is called, I should have numbered them, but it's called "What I Would Like to Tell My Younger Self About Infertility" with Julia Young, and we talk a lot about your own experience and really things you would have liked to do differently. And for anyone who's kind of in the situation where they're feeling a bit lost, I think that's a really good episode to listen to as well. If people want to find you, where is the best place to get hold of you?
So on my website, it's juliayoungnutrition.com, and I offer free 30-minute fertility reviews, so they can just go on the homepage there and book a fertility review, and we can have a chat on the phone and see if I might be someone that you'd like to work with. And I'm on Instagram at Julia Young Nutrition as well, so you can find me on there, and I'm posting quite regularly, so hopefully there's some useful information on there for you.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this chat with Julia Young, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Please like, share, save and rate this podcast if you found that useful, as it helps us reach more people. And if you're looking for a fertility specialist to support you, our practitioners can be contacted over at www.fertilitynutritioncenter.org. They all offer a free strategy call to help you decide on your best next steps on your journey. Thank you for listening.